Oh, there we go. Good morning, YouTube folks. Let me do these elsewhere. There we go.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning. All right, let's record. Hello there, and welcome to the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast here on hawkfanatic.com. Easy for me to say. Wednesday, December the 18th, 9:15 a.m. I am Rob Howe, joined by Scott Docterman from The Athletic, doing this a day early. Scott is off to South Bend tomorrow for the Friday night's game between Indiana and Notre Dame in the college football playoff. So we had the shift this week. I'm not always jealous about your assignments, Scott, but this one I am.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun double header for me this weekend, and it was almost a triple header, but I had to pull the I'm a man, I'm 50 plus now, and I can't quite get to Penn State in between the two games. But yeah, I'm going to go to Notre Dame. I'm excited about that, Rob. I've wanted to go there for I don't know ever, and so to see a football game in South Bend, Indiana, and it's a playoff game, the inaugural, the very first one on campus for the FBS. I think it's going to be fantastic. And then so I'm going to Indiana, Notre Dame Friday, and then driving Saturday morning to Columbus, and then doing Ohio State, Tennessee that night. So two chilly games. Might have some snow in South Bend, and what a weekend we've got coming up. One that I think a lot of people were hoping one of them might be in Iowa City. Didn't happen that way. It's got potential in the future, I'm sure, but at this point, it's I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, no doubt. The dynamic with Indiana, Notre Dame always being king in the state of Indiana for football, and now the Hoosiers have a shot to take down the Giant. It's just a really great storyline with Indiana's uh, ascension this year. It's just I'm excited. It's finally here. We've been waiting for the college football playoff, and I'll be locked in. I've already told people Saturday, don't bother me.
Yeah. You know what? We should kind of blend this a little bit with Festivus, because it's we won't be able to hit it at the normal time this year. And one of my gripes that they need to sit down and listen for and get a poll out for it is the NFL. Who the F do you think you are to decide, you know what, we're going to go ahead and play two games, not only just games, but heavy hitting games the same day of the inaugural college football playoff. I mean, these people feed into your program and you don't have to pay them a dime. It's a minor league feeder system. Now we know it more than ever. And yet you decide, let's go with Steelers, Ravens. Let's go with the Chiefs and the Texans. I mean, you couldn't just say the Cardinals or the Bengals or, somebody like that. No, you got to go all the way and hit the heavy hitters. Like, hey, we're the NFL and we're longer than everybody else. And so I think that is a gripe that I have that, something could have been arranged where maybe it would have been last weekend. They should have had the game, a couple of games, and they could have had it in prime time, like say around the Heisman ceremony. I'm sure college football could have worked around that. Maybe an early game and then Army, Navy, and then the nightcap. Instead, let's take all the attention away. And I'm sad to say that I could see some games not getting the ratings that they normally would get because, oh, well, we got to watch Steelers and Ravens.
Yeah, and you're just gonna have a lot of people probably flipping around
Yeah.
with the remote, and that hurts everybody. So yeah, I don't. Doesn't seem like a great business decision, but whatever. The
Yeah.
NFL can flex its muscles on
Yeah.
anybody and usually wins.
And it's like I don't have a problem that they're going to do that for for Christmas against the NBA, because that's professional leagues,
Yep.
they used to kind of do that they wouldn't have a Monday Night Football game during the World Series. And I think a lot of that was way back then. It was the World Series would get better ratings, but now fine, go take on the NBA. They take on you every Sunday. But I think in this case, you kind of work together. I think you're being a bad partner, but
I agree.
they don't care.
Yes, we will do our Festivus next Thursday,
Mhm.
26th. So we're going to be post actual Festivus, but it will not. I thought of somebody hit me on Blue Sky this morning asking if we were going to do it this morning. And I had thought about it last night when you asked if we could switch. And I'm like, you know what? I got a bunch of shit going on. I don't have time to
Yeah.
think about it. So we'll do it next week. It'll still be good. It'll give us something to do post Christmas after the
Yeah.
post Christmas hangover.
Boxing Day Festivus.
Yes. Uh, for this show, um, we are going to talk about. We'll start with the quarterbacks. We got consensus All Americans, team awards. We'll talk a little basketball, Hawkeye hoops. We didn't talk about the Iowa State game. We won't dwell on that a lot. The men's game, that is. We did talk about the women's game last week, but the men's game was the night we recorded Thursday morning last week. We have our Big Ten bowl picks. Speaking of the Indiana Notre Dame game, we'll talk a little bit of transfer portal here too, and then we also have the Golden Gavel. Scott and I don't disagree on much. We're pretty like-minded, but we just had a situation we had to deal with this one that kind of speaks to the new landscape of college football. So we kind of tie that in together. We'll do that towards the end of the show. But let's start with we talked about this last week because he was visiting last Thursday and he was at the Iowa State men's basketball game. And that is Hank Brown, quarterback from Auburn. He is in the fold. It's official. He signed all that good stuff. So the quarterback room as it stands looks like Brennan Sullivan, Jackson Stratton, Hank Brown, and Jimmy Sullivan. And those guys will all be here in the spring. And I'll tie in when you're thinking about this and the competition at the position, use some critical thinking. They're not going to make a decision on who the starter is in December. They're going to let these guys play through in the spring and actually compete for the job. I don't think they're going to tell people hey, you're 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to go in the spring and, this is the way. They have to do it reps wise, but from the landscape decision, if anything, Scott, this group is a group you want to compete and push each other because there isn't a guy you're just like, he's the guy.
You're right. There's when you look at it, Hank Brown, this is a healthy position for him to be in.
Yeah.
They played a little bit at Auburn. He had some good moments. He had some rough moments. He's young. He's inexperienced. He goes to a system that fits him and he gets a fresh start with an opportunity, whereas at Auburn, it was a little more hit and miss.
And they brought in Arnold.
Yeah, exactly.
It turned out anyway.
Yeah. So he would have been stuck. And,
yep.
I kind of said this before. I kind of compare his situation to that of like Luke Altmaier,
Mm-hmm.
and he was at Ole Miss. He kind of had a similar type of freshman year at Ole Miss. And then they bring in Jackson Dart and it's like, I want to go somewhere where I can compete. And he did. And he had, he got hurt a little bit and they had that John Paddock who came in and played really well in a game a year ago. But this year he was fantastic for him. And that may be the same kind of trajectory for Hank Brown if he ends up being the guy. But also, you remember you brought in Brennan Sullivan in June. He didn't have much time to absorb. He wasn't there for the spring for the whole offense. He was trying to play catch up all year long. And then he got hurt once he finally got into the offense. I thought other than against UCLA, I didn't think he played all that well. But other than that, he played pretty well. And you want that, he's a veteran guy and by all accounts, his teammates like him. Jimmy Sullivan's coming in January. Hey, good on him. He's going to be a guy that you feel like can compete because yes, he was originally recruited by the previous staff, but he didn't commit until after everybody knew that Brian Ferentz was leaving. And then Iowa gave Tim, as they should, gave Tim Lester the right. Hey, you want this guy or not? And he went out and really liked him. And so that's why they brought him in. If he didn't like him, it wouldn't be like, let's, no, they would have This wasn't just bringing in a guy just to take snaps. This was a legit guy. And finally, they're not done yet. They may go out. They're looking very hard at at one person, which is why the portal is where it is right now. And I mean, he's a kind of like Caden Proctor is one poster child for one situation. Well, Bo Prabula is another. I think it's how you pronounce it. I got.
It's funny you say that because I went to the Penn State site this morning to look for him, and I found him. And you like Iowa has the little ear icon with pronunciation. I couldn't find that on Penn State. Is it Pribula? What?
I should have asked Audrey before this. Maybe I'll DM her during our break. But
yeah, recommendation for sports information directors or people that run the rosters.
Yeah,
put those pronunciations in there. That's easy for people. So for everybody and their brothers doing a podcast these days, we need to know pronunciation.
Yeah, we don't want to sound like an idiot, especially when he comes here. If he doesn't, well, we'll live. But if he comes in, he's got the same opportunity as well. I mean, Iowa, they're not going to just, unless it's an established starter somewhere else, or just, Cade was a perfect example. They're not walking into this room. I mean, Hank Brown was not that quarterback. Now, if it had been Miller Moss, yes.
Yeah.
And then deservedly so. But I don't know. Rob, what did you think of getting Hank Brown? Because we've talked about the different angles of what Iowa may or may not want to do at that position. And you're getting a guy who's young, inexperienced, talented, has potential. Does this fit, or is this a bad move that they should have just said, hey, we're going to get number one and leave the rest aside?
No, we talked about this last week, Scott, with the Minnesota situation. They're going what you're saying, the latter example, which is let's get a guy every year to be our starter out of the portal.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know if you're Iowa, if you can live that way. And I'll see if we'll see if Minnesota can live that way. Because that's hard, man. You're bringing a new guy in to learn another. I mean, you're trying to find fits. You're competing with other teams for the guys that are established. Guys that can come in and play right away. So the competition is harder for those guys. I like it. I think you have Jimmy Sullivan, the guy that's going to need the most development at the bottom floor. Then you have Hank Brown. Then you have Stratton. Then you have Sullivan. And then if you bring in Bo, because I don't know how to say his last name, then he's kind of in the Sullivan range, I would think. Maybe in between Sullivan and Hank Brown in terms of experience, because they used him kind of like Penn State used him kind of like Iowa used Sullivan before Cade got hurt, as kind of that change of pace quarterback. So I like the idea of not only getting a guy you think can play right away, but also get some developmental guys and see, because, Brendan Sullivan has one more year left. So you tell Hank Brown, maybe we work you in a little bit this year, like we did with Sullivan last year, and then you have the lead going into next year, depending on who else they get. If they get Bo, then the situation changes. But with Iowa, I think you got to get as many guys in the room as you can, and hopefully you hit one.
You're exactly right. There's always been kind of this trepidation and an emotion attached to not only quarterback, but really a lot of all positions for Iowa, where say there's only a year or two that separates two players and everybody's worried that the younger player is going to transfer because, it sucks that there's only 2 years difference. He's going to leave. You know what? Don't worry about it. It'll take care of itself. You just need somebody who can play at that position and play well. And if that's Hank Brown, awesome. If it's Bo Prabula or Pribula or whatever, then all the better. Or if it's Jimmy Sullivan, that's fine too. If you go into next year and you think, Brendan Sullivan, I would expect, and it should be this way, that going into the spring, Brendan Sullivan's taking first team snaps.
Yep, I would agree.
Yeah, and if by the middle part of training camp, if Hank Brown's ahead of him, so be it. Let him be the starter then. And then Brendan, we're going to have kind of packages for you like we did this year. you are still a very important part of this team. I think that's healthy as well. And, if Sullivan, comes on like gangbusters, Nate Stanley was in that situation when he came in, we kind of like put him to the background, and then all of a sudden, no, he's number two. And I'm sure if they had their way, they wouldn't have played him in 7 games. They would have played him
Yeah.
in 0. That maybe Tyler Uyghur's coming in a few different spots would have been a lot better. But you could do it a couple of different ways. I mean, I wouldn't have had a problem with them bringing in a bona fide one and then a developmental guy, whether it's Hank Brown and a guy that has 1 year left, and doing it that way. But, there's only so much money that goes around. They have other spots they need to fill. And as you said, you want to have some consistency there. You don't want to churn it out. Minnesota tried it the newer way, the different way this year. They went and they got, last year, they got Max Brosmer. It worked out well. He was a really good player for them. They were only 7-5, so it wasn't like he was a rock star, but he played really well towards the end of the season. This year, they went and got Zach Pyron from Georgia Tech, and he's more in the category of Hank Brown. He had like 5 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. He was a backup to Hayes King, who was fantastic. And, he's got a couple more years left. Pyron does. So they went kind of that route. And I think that's okay too. And, but everybody's going to have to decide differently what's their step, because there are very few teams that can just live in the portal at that position. And even the ones that do, that's not healthy. Look at Ohio State. They would have been much better off standing pat than they would have at, going out and getting Will Howard. But, that's what happens when your fan base rips apart your quarterback.
Yeah, no doubt. And we talked about this before, and it's a couple things that you mentioned there that I want to touch on. One is we've seemed to forget this, or I don't seem to forget this because I've been doing this a while, but it seems to be forgotten sometimes in general thought and conversation. They're college kids, man. They get better. You hope that Brendan Sullivan next year is much better than he was this year. You hope that Hank Brown is better next year than he was last year at Auburn. And down the line at every position, guys get better. It's at different rates. It's hard to predict. But that's what you need. And at Iowa, a developmental program, it's even magnified more. You need it even more. Mm-hmm. So that's important. And then in terms of the transfer portal, if you're Iowa, we've talked about this before, it's about being realistic, right? You can't, you can throw your hat in the ring for Miller Moss, but the odds of you getting somebody like that aren't great. Not with where you stand right now as an offense, especially a passing offense. I mean, you could sell the guy, hey, you could come in here and be the guy that gets us. The guy's like, nah, I'm going to go somewhere where I already know the offense is established. Yeah. That's harder. Hank Brown is in your range. Is Bo in your range? We'll find out, but you take a shot at it, but you don't put all your eggs in that basket. You don't go crazy resource-wise in pursuing somebody that you don't feel like you have a chance at. It's just like high school recruiting. Yeah. If a kid's looking at Ohio State, Notre Dame, and USC, and he's a receiver, chances are Iowa's probably not going to get him, right?
Yeah, so, exactly.
Be realistic and get the guys you can get. And even Jordan Dwyer, the kid from Idaho, right? Yeah. You're thinking, all right, Iowa's got a chance with him. They offer early. He's visiting USC today.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is hard for college football programs like Iowa to manage December and try to put these pieces together and figure out which guys fit and which guys are going to work in our program. It's difficult.
It is. And that's why it's tough, because what fans want, they figure, oh, we're Iowa. And it's true. There's a pecking order, but it's on positions in a lot of cases. And you also have to look at fit, because there are some times where it doesn't work out. I mean, we saw that in the spring where you have to have a certain attitude or, mindset that works better at Iowa than at other places. And that's healthy. I mean, you
take a shot with Caleb Brown, right? Yeah. Why wouldn't you take that shot?
Exactly.
Didn't work.
It didn't work. Move on, and don't don't spend a lot of time whining about it. Just move on, and Caden Proctor situation didn't work. That's probably worse, but
Yeah.
but you took your shot,
Yep.
and it didn't work out. I think that's the same way here, that you've got to try to figure out pieces that fit. And Iowa's always been really good at most positions outside of quarterback and receiver about finding those players that fit their team, their program, and doing it in a way that maximizes their potential in the freshman recruiting. And I think when you see the developmental guys that they come in, maybe they make mistakes and then they get better and better. I mean, look at Logan Jones a few years ago. He couldn't even snap the ball, and and people are like, get rid of him. Anybody's better than that. Rusty, remember Rusty? He should be starting over him. He was one of the best centers in the country this year, and he's coming back for. I mean, that if he was out on the open market, his salary would be higher than probably his NFL salary.
I think Iowa's offensive line is a great example of what we're talking about. When you look at across the board, Jennings Dunker, the progress he made from last year to this year. Connor Colby, his trajectory through his career. I mean, people were wanting him out early on. He was really good this year. Logan Jones, you said. Bo Stevens dealt with some injuries.
Yeah.
Big step forward this year. Mason Richmond got better progressively. That's what you need at Iowa.
And when you look at those guys in particular, I mean, some of the things that I think are I don't know if unique to Iowa, but part of the mosaic of Iowa football is good stories when they hit their final season, and offensive line in particular, and I think other parts of the defensive back and probably defensive line as well are where you see that growth to the end of their careers where, okay, they're a good player. I remember Ross Reynolds just being a guy. And then boom, he's a second team all Big Ten guard. He's pretty good. You look at, Jamari Harris, just a guy. Boom, he's really good at the end of the year, at the end of his career. And I think the list goes on and on for guys in that. And Logan Jones is in that category. Connor Colby, he should not have even been.
Jay Higgins.
Exactly.
Waited his turn.
And it would be tough. Yeah.
And that's going to be more rare these days. Now, I'm not saying at Iowa, just across the country. A guy's not going to wait like Jay Higgins wait. Most guys won't do that.
Right. He's got a chance to play right away. But I'll tell you what, if he would have went to Miami of Ohio, what would that have, he still would have been great. He would have been first team All-MAC, probably All-American consideration, but he wouldn't be the player he is today without being at Iowa. And that's something that Iowa can sell. I mean, there's a lot that Iowa needs to sell to buy players, but also look at, their offensive line. And, they've had a guy in from Rice who's also getting, offensive tackles right now on the market are going.
So it's a seller's market for most positions.
Yeah. And if you're an offensive tackle, quarterback, of course, is always a good quarterback.
Receivers seem to be in high demand.
Yeah. And edge rusher. I mean, you can, it mirrors what the NFL has.
Sure.
And if you're talking about somebody who's a pass blocker, a pretty good one, a starter, then the market's going to be really high. I mean, there's a couple of players who, one I know that, ended up with like $800K, and he was an FCS player because he can pass protect. And, and that's the market you run into if you're Iowa. And a really interesting conversation I had with Tyler Barnes a couple of weeks ago, I think it was on signing day, was they've got to establish, okay, do we want to go all in on one guy, bring him in at that position, or not even get him? And then how does that relate to our developmental philosophy? Can you be just as good, or can you potentially get there by the end of the year if a Trevor Lauk or if a Jack Dotzler or if there's somebody else can sit in there and grow, take a little bit of lumps early, but grow into it and be good by the end of the year? How much of that do you want to try to work through? And my guess is, Rob, that with Logan Jones, it sounds like Dunker will probably flip to left tackle. Bo Stevens, 3 starters returning. Then you've got the guard is one where you can really say, you know what, we're going to have an all-out competition of the guys who are in the room.
Yep.
Whether that's Cade Pieper, that's Mike Bislinski, that's anybody who's capable. Trevor Lauk. Tackle might be the one that they're like, it's a little bit of a step to get to where we want to be. So maybe it's time to get a 1-year stopgap and maybe have again, Trevor Lauk or Jack Dotzler, be our third tackle, be what Nick DeYoung was.
Yeah.
And so it'd build it that way. That would be my guess. One guy can step in, start, play well. Coy Cronk was going to be that guy a few years ago, and then he got hurt in week 2. So you might just be screwed anyway. But that's a interesting philosophy, and that's what makes this it may be aggravating, but it's also very interesting.
Yeah, and I've kind of settled into in terms of a reporting standpoint. Let me know when the guy's visiting. I don't want to know that I was interested.
Yeah.
On social media, when a guy goes in the portal and they're like, Iowa's in, let me know if he's going to visit. But I'm with you, and I think Iowa needs to find its sweet spot. Because I think, like you said, is right tackle an immediate need? Do you need to have a right tackle out of the portal to help you next year? Is that the way to go? Is that a position where you're like, all right, if we shore up the right tackle spot, it makes everybody on the offense better. It raises the play of everybody. But I also think, and I was obviously doing it, you are still a developmental program. So bring a guy like Hank Brown in and develop him. He's got a couple years in college, but maybe he's more advanced and closer to doesn't need as much development as a high school guy or a junior college guy or something like that. So just that philosophy at every position. If we can get a guy who's got 2 years left and we see a need at a certain position that's going to open up, let him compete this year at, say, cornerback, right? And then, like, say it was this season and you bring in a cornerback and he's got 2 or 3 years left, but he's competing with those other guys that were opposite Jamari, and he's kind of in the mix, and he's maybe not as good as them, but then he's ahead of them and that may not be the best example, but you kind of understand what I'm saying here.
Yeah.
Don't look at the transfer portal as just getting a guy that can help you right now. You can also use it to get guys you can develop that maybe have already been developed a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why each position is different. Like, I would say for Iowa, when you look at defensive line, now that Ethan Hurkett announced he's coming back, you look at him, you look at Aaron Graves, and I would say Max Llewellyn too. I think Max is a guy that's going to be, he's a starter, and I have no qualms about that. But you probably need somebody at defensive tackle, and whether that means it's a starter, and it's a guy like Jack Heflin or somebody even, better than that, or that means, hey, that's going to push Jeremiah Pittman to being a quality starter. It doesn't matter. You just need somebody there. You're going to need, Iowa runs as the strength of Iowa's run on defense, even this year, which wasn't as strong as it was the previous couple of years, because it's never been that strong before. But they're at their strength when they can get 7 to 8 guys, legitimate guys, to be in the 7 or 8 guys that legitimately can rotate on a consistent basis. Brian Allen, once he's healthy, could probably be that guy. And then you're like, okay, we probably need one more on the edge. Do you bring him in, or do you say, you know what, if we really push Kenny Merriweather, he can get there? Or we can really push, take your pick on, anybody else. I have their depth chart kind of up right now, and or by class, that I keep that on file. And let's say, Kenny Merriweather, is he in that guy? One of the freshmen from last year? Can they be, Joseph Anderson or Chineke or even a Drew Campbell? Can they get there? Or, Yosei Epineza, can they be a rotational guy? Or do you need somebody else to walk in and fill that role, and will they be happy? Because let's face it, Max Llewellyn and Ethan Hurkett are going to start. That's just the way it's going to work out.
And to finish this up, with the new roster size going to 105, you don't have as many guys that you can develop now. You don't have the walk-on development program that you had before. So maybe it is beneficial to go in and get a guy who's has a year or two under his belt in college already and is already like, you're all right. I'm looking at some of his practice film and he looks like a guy that we can work with. Maybe that changes the dynamic a little bit too. There's just the landscape is ever changing, roster sizes, all that stuff is in play now.
Yeah. Yeah, take defensive back. Iowa has lived off having a walk-on safety from the state of Iowa,
Yeah.
usually from a parochial school, from Jack Kerner and Jake Gervast, and now Quinn Schulte to, whoever is next. Or then some of the in-state guys. I think Zach Lutmer is going to fill a little bit of that role. Maybe he's going to be Cash instead. But that brings it back to the conversation a little bit ago, which is if you go out and get a corner, is that player going to be better than Deshaun Lee, John Nestor, TJ Hall, Jalen Watson?
Yeah.
Any of those guys, or is that corner going to be just like him? Well, if he's just like him, then you already know your guys. That's unless you feel like he's better and he can start right away or he has higher growth potential, then stay away. You want somebody who can walk in and play and be a first or second team all Big Ten guy, because chances are you're going to piss off one of those guys.
Yep.
And then they hit the portal and they're going to go to any one of those three, if they left, they'd go to another power conference school, probably start because they were at Iowa and they played. And then you're like, okay, we just traded even up, but we already knew this guy. He's a high character guy. We like him. Why did we do that? And I think that's what most developmental programs go through. And, when you look at linebacker, that's one where you're like, man, we're losing some serious, experience with Jay Higgins, Nick Jackson, and, Kyler Fisher. That would be normally what at 20,000 foot, you'd say we need to go get a guy. But when you look at it and peel back the layers or peel back the onion a little bit, and you'll say, yeah, but they've got guys who are already kind of in place that have been there for a while. And your redshirt freshman class and incoming freshman class are kick ass. There are 5 guys who are players. The 2 guys coming in are awesome. The 3 guys who are here this year, awesome. And we would rather, if you're Iowa, go develop those guys. Jaden Harrell, Carson Shire, Jackson Rexroth kind of hold the fort for a year. We feel pretty good about it. And if one of those guys beats out Jackson or Carson or something, so be it. I think that you just got to, that's where healthy analysis of your position group really fits in. And it's obvious the wide receiver, even though they looked better this year, they're not where they want to be. So they're going out and they're looking at everybody.
Yeah. And that's a situation where my point earlier may be best used is at wide receiver. You get a kid that's maybe a couple years in. Caleb Brown didn't work out from Ohio State, but maybe there's another Ohio State kid that's just, obviously we all know how good the receiver room is, that's just lost in the shuffle, but could help you. And you're like, all right, he hasn't shown much, but we can develop him quicker than we can develop a kid coming out of high school that needs even more development at that position.
Jacob Gill.
Yeah. Great example.
You get 2 guys coming in from Big Ten institutions. One is a 4-star from Ohio State. You immediately think, all right, great, top 75 athlete. Didn't work out. He's now going to UAB this year. Jacob Gill, afterthought, just a guy, didn't play much. He was the best receiver on the team, and he did everything you asked him to do. He was tough. He made tough catches. He blocked his ass off. Good teammate. I mean, all the things you really ask for. So, there's no downside with that. I think, and then, the risk is, and it's the same thing with defensive back, as I just explained, is when you've got Reese Vandersee and you've got Dayton Howard and Jarrett Bowie, I'm sorry. Bowie, TJ Washington, Seth Anderson, and you've got those guys, you've got to figure out, all right, are we willing to take that step forward and go grab X receiver, knowing that it may lose us Y receiver? And I think that's something that I'm sure that they've done that risk assessment and figured, you know what, we just need to get better there. And if that includes losing a couple more guys, it sucks, but we're willing to take it. And, and there's a reason why that they only picked up one receiver in the, as a freshman, a guy who's, Terrence Smith, who's got immense potential, but he's
He's a
still
developmental guy.
Yeah, exactly. And you're blessed that you have a really good recruiter in Seth Wallace in Chicago, that he was able to persuade him to come to Iowa to develop, and I wouldn't, that's a position like we saw with Reese Vanderzee this year, that they are not afraid at all to bring somebody in and say, oh, wow,
Yeah.
he was hurt. That's why he didn't play baseball. And then voila, he became an opening day starter, the first one in Iowa football history.
Yeah, and I was going to have to hit on some of those receivers, but like Scott said, you hope guys, even a Seth Anderson, but more like a Dayton Howard and Jarrett Bowie, those guys, Reese Vanderzee, those guys make a jump from this season to next season. They've got 8 months to get better here before the season comes. So I guess what we're saying in a nutshell over just an overview here is it's the Iowa staff is tasked with evaluating all these things. Is this guy going to be where we need him to be in 8 months, or do we need to get somebody? And you have to play the averages. You have to play the odds. What's going to make us the best team we can be? And it's an exact science. I mean, we go back to it again, but how many people were on board with Cade McNamara?
Yeah.
Percentage. I mean, was in the court of public opinion, he was a home run. Didn't work out. You took your best shot, and that's going to happen.
And here's one thing that I am pretty aware of is that it's now more of a discussion among all the staff members about this stuff. It's not just secluded to the offensive coordinator, head coach, general manager making a decision kind of unilaterally in some ways on Cade McNamara. Now it's kind of more of a staff decision. Now, Tyler and Scott Southmaid and all those guys, they do a great job, and they figure out, identify, and they spent pretty much the last month of the regular season going through guys, film, guys that made sense, all that stuff. They did a, pretty thorough dive into the portal over in November. The interesting part to me is that, like with Cade, they were very quick with it. They jumped the gun, obviously.
Yeah, a little
bit. But it surprised a lot of people. They weren't whoa, really? We did this? This seems to be more of a collective discussion among the staff now, that they feel more together on these moves. And that's really healthy as well. And I think that's what Tim Lester brings is a different kind of vision. And I think everybody's buying into it a little bit more, and they're seeing it. And then, the staff is kind of building from that. And there's some really good connections, that they're making. And it's hard to say how many end up, working for them. I know Kelvin is probably working overtime more than has anybody, going after, a guy from Western Michigan and Northwest Missouri State. I'm sure they're both coming down. I know the Northwest Missouri State guy is coming down.
He committed. Did he? He committed to Missouri last night. The Northwest Missouri State guy.
I missed
Kitchen?
it. Yeah, Kitchen.
Yeah, he committed to Missouri.
Okay.
Makes sense. He's from that area.
Yeah, it's Northwest is about 4 hours from Mizzou and 4 hours from Iowa, so
I think he's from the St. Louis area, though.
Okay.
Or that part of the state of Missouri. I think that's what when he committed last night, that's somebody mentioned that, he's going home.
Okay. Well, I stand corrected. I missed that. I missed that one. I was looking over.
That's it, right? You move on. Who's next? You're good. Like Bo Pribula. He was at Missouri yesterday. Do you get him on campus? He goes to Missouri. He goes somewhere else. You move on. Who's next?
Yeah.
That's the way you got to play this thing. You can't fall in love with guys, and you have to have a wide net.
Yeah. And, in Iowa's case, as we know, in recruiting for freshmen, they are very narrow. They don't cast a wide net. They basically, use a fishing pole.
Yeah.
And it's worked for them. Let's
Yeah.
face it. Their character on their team and their program all these years has been off the charts. I mean, there's really been very few shitheads, really. I mean,
Yeah.
most of them have been very good young men that, and you get the guys like Jay Higgins to, Jack Campbell, the list goes on and on and on and on. So this is kind of foreign for them
Yeah.
to have to speed date to grab guys in the portal. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but
We'll figure it out. I
yeah.
mean, it's new for everybody.
Right.
You got to figure out where you are and what you can do and, what works best for you. That, like you said, they've established that with high school, with prep kids. Now they're going to have to try to work it out and figure out how this works with the portal.
And I keep a daily rundown. I go through both On3 and 24/7 as far as number of players in the portal for each of the Big Ten teams. You could be Iowa right now, which is shedding a lot of their walk-ons. And probably, I mean, there's really nobody that I've seen, Rob, and you tell me if you feel differently, that I look at and I go, man, that hurts. That's one that you really feel like, I mean, I look at somebody like Rusty Van Wetzingen. I said he fits what Iowa wants, but that position's not really relevant anymore. And he's a walk-on to boot. I mean, there's a lot I like there. But out of the group, most of them were in that walk-on category. And but then you look at, like Purdue, who has 30 players in the portal, and they're good players. And their players, I mean, they lost Cole Brevard to Texas, Dylan Thieneman to Oregon. Max Clare is still in there. He's a tight end. He's really good. They've got good players, and they're at 30 right now that have hit the portal. Musa, the tackle, went to Louisville. So they're worse than Indiana was last year as far as scorched earth, and all of their players are gone. And you
got the situation at Marshall.
Yes, they can't even play in a bowl game. Yeah,
that's the extreme.
Yes,
they're all in the portal.
Yeah, I mean, they just said, they should have. There was rumors of that anyway when Charles Huff was leaving, and then all of a sudden it was like they still accepted the bowl bid, and then that turned out to be a real crap storm, if you know.
Disaster.
Screwed the bowl, screwed other teams, because then they had to fill in with a 5-7 team, and you do that by APR. Louisiana Tech was 17 out of 18 teams in APR. That they should have never been in that position. Of course, they're only 100 miles up the road. Makes sense that way. But to wait a full week, that really was, then teams like Wisconsin, which lost all their quarterbacks, they're like, well, we can't go. They were number 2 in the APR thing. I'm sure if it would have happened the day or day after, they would have been able to field a team.
That's a funny situation too. We keep continuing this conversation, but the Billy Edwards situation was interesting too. Speaking of Wisconsin,
right? Yeah.
Commits to Michigan, then he commits to Wisconsin a few days later.
It's kind of like when anybody starts complaining about that, and I mean, I know this now we'll complain, but you think of the Deacon Hill situation.
Yeah.
He committed to Fordham, and then Iowa said, hey, you're sure you want to go to Fordham? And the tackle a couple of years ago, who's in kind of a similar situation, who never really did play, got hurt. He's from Saginaw Valley State.
Yeah. I can see his face, and I can't remember his name. But
nice kid. Parker?
Parker, yeah. Dejon Parker.
Dejon Parker. Yeah, I think who was he? He was Syracuse, maybe, or somebody like that he was committed to. I can't remember exactly, but he that's the rules until you sign, until you show up, then you're
all's fair in love in the portal.
Yep, exactly. Love it.
It is probably a good time for us to take a break. A lot of football talk, but that's pretty much standard on the Hotspot podcast. That was good conversation about the state here. So support for the podcast comes from Systems Unlimited, celebrating 50 years of providing services to people living with disabilities and mental health needs throughout East Central Iowa. A list of their services and upcoming events can be found at sui.org. That is sui.org. Hear from a few more sponsors right now, and Scott and I will be back on the other side. Hang tight. To the Hawkeye Hotspot podcast. Switching is easy. We do it all the time. We switch on the lights, we switch TV channels. Some of us switch partners while square dancing. Well, that's a stretch. But what's not a stretch is how you can switch and save with State Farm. In fact, State Farm agent Chad Birch, right here in Iowa, can switch you over so you can start saving today. Chad and his team are ready to welcome you to the State Farm neighborhood. With Chad Birch, it's easy to switch and save. Just give him a call when you want the real deal. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Hardcore Hawk fans got to have a Kinnick Scoreboard Entertainment Center. Contact Fanatics Furniture at 319-750-0005 or KNICK3615 at gmail.com. Scoreboard Entertainment Centers, be hardcore, 319-750-0005 or KNICK3615 at gmail.com. Black Angel Restaurant, downtown Iowa City. Perez Brothers owned and operated, formerly of El Bandido's Perez Brothers Tacos. Good friend of mine, Jesse Villalobos, former roommate of mine. My early years in Iowa City will be playing at Black Angel this Friday night. Does R&B, a lot of James Brown, stuff like that. So go check him out. You will not be disappointed with the music or the food. And thank you to all of our sponsors. Where do we want to go here next, Scott? Let's go with the consensus All-Americans. We talked about that before we started recording. Iowa has another one definitively in Jay Higgins, and it's going to be Caleb Johnson too, and Scott is going to explain how that happens.
Yeah. This is very
it's a little complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated, but it's certainly something that is obviously it's very important. And that is, the difference. There's levels of All-American, as we know, or should know. There's unanimous All-American, and there are 5 units that are kind of like the 5 families of All-American teams. And you could, and I could make a case that the athletic team or ESPN or Sports Illustrated even are as reputable as any of the others, but over history,
it's a historical thing.
Yeah, there have been 5 outlets because the Sporting News. I have friends who work there, but and by the way, we just got. I hate to interrupt this discussion, but Caitlin Clark's jersey ceremony is February 2nd, Groundhog Day.
I was wondering. I knew that was coming this year. It was. They did the same thing with right after Megan graduated the next season. They did it. I just figured they were probably. I was wondering which date they would land on. Who did they play?
USC.
Nice.
Yeah.
Maybe she could suit up. Maybe they could sneak her in there with like a Bobby Valentine disguise on and put her in the lineup. Because Juju's a problem.
Yeah, Juju versus Caitlin Clark in Iowa City. That would be something. So anyway, all right. Sorry to get lost on that.
No, that was important. Glad we got that in there.
Yeah. When you look at again with the All-Americans, there's 3 levels. One is you're unanimous, and there's the heads of the 5 families. And for the Big Ten, I'm a rep for the FWAA, Football Writers of America Association, or Association of America. And so I do a lot.
1945 was the first FWAA All-American team. So we talk about history. They've been around a while.
Almost 80 years. So there's the Walter Camp. There's the AFCA, which is American Football Coaches Association, AP, and then the Sporting News. And all 5 of them comprise what's consensus/unanimous. And if you're unanimous, you've got all 5. Jay already has 4, and the 5th's coming out today. I would be surprised if, I would be disappointed for him if he's not on that one too. He deserves it. So he could be a unanimous first team All-American, which actually has become semi-commonplace as well. Then there's consensus All-Americans. And that is, it means you, for that position group, you are one of the majority of your position. Like running backs, it would be 2. Defensive line, it would be 4. Now there are ties, which still give you consensus honors, which is what is facing Caleb Johnson right now, because out of the 4 groups that previously went, Walter Camp, AP, AFCA, and Football Writers of America, he's been on 2. Now, the other 2 included Cam Skattebo, who's thanks Iowa State, removed Caleb from the Heisman consideration and everything because of his game against Iowa State. And Omarion Hampton from North Carolina, who's fantastic too. And I would argue Dylan Sampson's as good as any of them too. But they each have 1 and Caleb has 2. So if the Sporting News comes out and says Cam Skattebo is our first team All-American running back, then there's 2 running backs with 2 first team votes apiece, and then Ashton Jeanty, who will be a unanimous guy. Then they both tie for consensus and they're granted consensus status. I looked back and Adrian Claiborne was in that category. He had 2. He was out of the defensive line. He was tied for 4th. And so he was granted consensus All-American status. So effectively, Caleb is, consensus. It's just a matter of, how that, whether he's by himself, if they go with him for the first team versus second team. So either way, Jay is the 32nd consensus All-American for Iowa. And some of these numbers are just, kind of astounding.
You know how many have been unanimous?
I believe I have that number written down somewhere, Rob, but I believe it was 16 or 17, something like that. And they've been growing almost every year. They've had it, a Tyler Linderbaum, a Jack Campbell, Tory Taylor, stuff like that. So there's, and Jay will enter that category as well. So it's really impressive. And we see like the All-American wall at the building, and every year it's like the adjustment. And I don't know how much, and
I remember when they had him in the old building, in the old where attached to the track, the rec center there, the back side of that, down in the basement where the Kirk used to have his press conference in Hayden, they had him on the wall down there. And it was just like, wow, there's not many of these guys. And then, the last 20 years, it's just continued to grow. And now they wouldn't be able to fit it where they used to have them.
Yeah, exactly. But you think back here's just kind of a list over the last 10 years. Brandon Sheriff in 14, Desmond King in 15. In 17, you had Josh Jackson and Josie Jewell. I don't think there was consensus in 18. No, there wasn't. Hawkinson was second team for the most part, or he just missed consensus. He was like, he had 2 first teams or something like that. And there was,
but he won the Mackey.
Yeah, but he won the Mackey. He was the best, no question. And he won when it really mattered in April for the NFL. Yeah. Keith Duncan in 19, Davion Nixon in 20, Tyler Linderbaum in 21. You had Jack Campbell in 22. Last year was Cooper DeJean and Tory Taylor. And then this year it's, Jay Higgins, who's, going to be, unanimous. And then you had Caleb Johnson, who will be consensus. So that's a heck of a roll. And I know some fans will go, well, that didn't matter. We didn't do that. You know what? When you look at the overall wins over that, I mean, when you're one of 8 programs over the last 10 years, or 5 programs over the last 10 years, to have 8 or more wins in all 10 years, except for the COVID year, which you won 75% of your games. And if you would have played the other 2, you would have had 8 wins. That is impressive. That's important. That's something you can be proud of. Now, are they winning championships? I caution you at your own peril to go look at what Ohio State and Michigan have over that. But for Iowa, that's pretty good.
Yeah, there's, if you look at Iowa and what it can sell, it's that circling all the way back. It's the development. Because if you look at the guys that are on that list,
Mm-hmm.
think about what those guys were in recruiting. How many
Yes.
stars did those guys have? The list that Scott just went down. That is your selling point. We took this guy, Jay Higgins, from Indianapolis, who had no other Power Five offers, and we turned him into a unanimous All American. And then on top of that, you look at the success with putting guys in the NFL. Those are your selling points. And I think you sell that high school wise, and you can certainly sell that in the transfer portal. And guys that are drawn to that, those are the guys you want. Those are the guys that fit.
Exactly. Because, you go down that list of those guys, and then there are others who got first team All-American honors, like Tristan and TJ Hawkinson and stuff, but, weren't consensus or unanimous, would have been had they been around for another year. But, Desmond, borderline 2-star guy who was offered by Indiana to play running back and nowhere else at a Power 5 level. Iowa picks him to be a defensive back, and then in 15, he leads the country in interceptions. He wins the Thorpe Award. Sheriff was a 3-star from Western Iowa. I don't remember his offer list, but
may have had Nebraska, maybe.
Yeah, maybe something like that. Josh Jackson, a 2-star wide receiver from Texas. Josie Jewell, a 2-star from Decorah, who was going to go and play at Luther College if he didn't come to Iowa. And who was telling me? It might have been Phil, who said we had 3 options for him. It was safety, linebacker, or fullback. It depended on his lateral movement and speed. If he, in size, obviously, he's like, if he had no lateral movement, he'll go to fullback. If he had lateral movement, he would, then be on defense. And then it's just a matter of where his speed and size ended up. And then, of course, he ended up as a first team All-American. Keith Duncan was a walk-on kicker. Davion Nixon, highly talented, troubled, but, played really well in that COVID. Yeah. Tyler Linderbaum, he wasn't under recruited. I mean, but he was just a local guy that pretty much shunned everybody else. But I can't remember. I think he was 3.
He had Iowa State, I think.
Yeah.
Iowa State offered him first, but as soon as Iowa offered, he was pretty much a done deal.
Yeah, and he went to the Army All-American game, so he wasn't just a guy or anything. Jack Campbell, it was Iowa State, and he shut down Minnesota pretty quick. But 3-star, blah blah blah. Cooper DeJean, we all know that story. He moved up to be a 4-star, but he was still recruited by South Dakota State and Iowa. And then Torrey, of course, they went and got him from Australia. And Jay Higgins, as you said, God, kid had like 500 tackles in high school. And, and it was between Iowa and like Ball State or something. And, and what's funny is I went and visited him at his high school before I went. I stopped at the combine when he was there, and we talked to his coach and stuff. And it turned out, like Seth Wallace came in and he said to work him out. And he said, we're offering 1 linebacker in this class, and we want to see if it's you or not. I want to see you work out. And they decided to take a chance on him. And ultimately it was one of the biggest wins Iowa's ever had, because as we know, there hasn't been a more loquacious, fun, energetic person, let alone interview, to be around than Jay Higgins.
Yep. He's a great representative of the program and his family, and interested to see what type of shot he gets on the next level. He'll get a shot, and I would not bet against him.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit of hoops. We won't spend a ton of time on this. Again, we're going to dive into hoops a little bit more once we get through football. Although football never dies, as we talked about with the transfer portal and everything else, it just kind of keeps rolling. But we talked about the only Iowa women game that we haven't talked about. They played 1 game since last Wednesday, and that was at Michigan State on Sunday. A much improved Michigan State team, ranked in the top 20. Iowa lost by 2 points. No shame in that. Good learning experience like the Tennessee game was. But I think it showed us that Iowa's getting everybody's best shot, and they're going to have to figure out a way to pull these games out, because they're not beating teams by 20 and 30 points like they were with Caitlin, they're going to have to find a way to win close games. They did it against Iowa State. They didn't do it against Michigan State. Iowa men did it against Northwestern, didn't do it against Iowa State.
Mhm.
So I think similarities with those two teams, Scott, just in terms of finding ways to play well down the stretch. I think that's the similarity between the two right now.
Yeah, let's start with the women on this. Michigan State, I don't know that people remember or realize that they are undefeated, and they were ranked higher than Iowa, and they were at home, and they had a nice crowd there. Iowa played a really good game up until the fourth quarter.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought their defense let them down, and I thought the press got to them. And their defense, they allowed way too much driving to the basket. And I look at this as a teachable moment for everybody from Jan on down, which is, I mean, if people are beating your guards to the hoop as regularly as that happened, you're probably going to need to go to a zone or something, just to get people to shoot instead of drive. And then they were struggling with press breaker, and then they were leaving people out, like Hannah Stolke shooting threes. They can't guard her in the post. You're just going to have to figure that out. And I think part of it is, they were able to fight their way after giving up a 14-0 run, which went from a 7-point lead to a 7-point deficit. They were able to fight their way back and put themselves in a position to tie or win the game with a last-second shot, and it didn't go. Those things happen. I think what you learn and you take away from it is they're still working on chemistry, I think. And it's not just Lucy Olson's new, it's that Hannah Stolke wasn't able to practice in the summer because of her knee. Sydney Falder wasn't able to practice much of the fall because of her knee. Lucy's new. They also have 4 freshmen who are contributing in a heavy way. And then you have some holdovers who've never been in that spot before. Kylie Feuerbach, for instance, who was more of a role player. So, as opposed to last year where it was Caitlin and Kate and Gabby Marshall and Molly Davis. And she was kind of, okay, she'd go in for 10, 12 minutes a game. And sometimes the shots would be there, but she was always deferring to people. Now you're more of a starring role. And then there are other players, I think the freshmen have been great.
Yeah, great.
I think Taylor Stremlow is playing like a sophomore already and will be, you just see her and you just think Kate Martin. that's what I think.
Don't be a fan favorite.
Yeah. And, and Tegan Malini is playing well. I think Ava Hayden gives them good minutes. And of course, Aaliyah Guyton is a superstar waiting to happen.
Yep.
So there's so many positives here, and I hate to say it. I think they probably learned more from losing that game than they would have had the score been reversed. And, you want to win. It's a Big Ten game, but ... big picture. Okay. It gets your attention. And I'm sure Jan feels the same way. She probably felt awful after that game. Like, dang, I could have done this better. I should have done this. Good. Everybody should take ownership into that, and they'll learn from it. They'll grow. They play a good opponent this week, and UNI, and then they get in the Big Ten, and they'll be able to use those experiences to propel them forward. So I didn't look at that negatively at all, other than the fact that they just happened to lose the game.
Yeah, and they obviously need to figure out the turnover situation. And it's not super surprising when you lose Caitlin Clark, Kate Martin, Gabby Marshall, and Molly Davis. They're pretty good at handling the ball, that group.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And now 30 turnovers against Tennessee, 22 turnovers against Michigan State. That's the glaring, all right, we need to fix this. And it's happening against the press a lot.
Yeah.
That's what you got to work on in practice. Teams have found a weakness of yours. You have to work on it and get it better.
Yeah, exactly. And, if it doesn't work out, then they're going to have a tough season, because the Big Ten is with the new teams is deeper and better than it's ever been. And the holdovers are every bit as good, if not better. Maryland is fantastic. Michigan State is now in a really good spot. And, Indiana is not even ranked, and they're Indiana, so you've got Ohio State's in there, Cody McMahon, you've got, this is as good of a league as there is, and everybody's going to exploit you. and so that's something that they've got to work on. I'm sure they will. I'm sure they are. So yeah, it's one of those things for me that they've played a pretty challenging schedule.
Mhm.
They've come through it pretty well. They've got things to work on in the future. I mean, remember last year this team lost to Kansas State early. They've had, year before it was Kansas State and NC State, and
Yep.
they're going to lose a couple more games for sure. It's going to happen. But I think overall it's healthy. Now, if they get to February and these are still issues, then it's not. Then it means they're not growing and they've got issues that they can't fix. And that's something, you will look for. But as of right now, learn from it, grow, get better, improve. And then at some point, it's like, oh, we only had 7 turnovers and we're able to beat their press. And then we won by 15 because then we had open looks all night long.
Football conversation earlier. It's a process, right? It's a development process. This team, you hope, builds and is starting to hit its stride mid to late February into March, playing its best basketball. That's what you want to do. And maybe you make a run. A lot of talent on the team, so it would not surprise me at all. They play, as Scott said, Northern Iowa. The women still do play the other in-state schools. That's at home at Carver Hawkeye, Friday night, 6:30. The men, Iowa men, coming off a ridiculous win Sunday against a New Orleans team that I hopefully got a good payday because that was brutal. But it was a good bounce back after a tough loss against Iowa State on Thursday, where Iowa played well. They just were playing a team that's in the top 5 and a team that they have to play 40 minutes of good basketball against, and they didn't. And they will return to action Saturday up in Sioux Falls against Utah. So an opportunity there. They've lost to Utah State in the non-conference. They lost to Iowa State, Scott. Those were 2 really good opportunities for non-conference wins to build your resume. It almost feels like Saturday you got to get that win against Utah, because if not, you're then you're going to have to do a whole lot of work in the Big Ten, even more work. You're going to have to do plenty of work in the Big Ten as it is, but if you lose another quality non-conference games, you put yourself really in a tough spot.
Then every time you lose a game like that, you kind of got to say, in order to get to the tournament, we need to win one more conference game.
Yep.
And as we know, the Big Ten's really deep, as it always is, but particularly this year with new teams and longer trips and all that sort of thing. And so, and they have played a lot of rum-dums, on their schedule. Other than Iowa State at home, and as you said, Utah State, Kansas City. Now they're at Utah again. It's Utah and Sioux Falls. They were able to beat Northwestern. That was a good
Washington
win.
State was an okay win.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
power. Well, are they Power 4? I guess they are. Or Power 5. They're the Pac-12.
They are the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is now no longer part of the power structure, unfortunately. And then when they do expand, then they are not a part of it either. It's kind of like who gets the access into the playoff with a championship, and they're not really one of them anymore. But winning the Iowa State game, they played about as well as they could have for about 34 minutes.
Yep.
And they played really well. And Iowa State didn't play very well for themselves, because I've seen them play much better. But Iowa had a lot to do with that. They were active. Brock Harding was very hard to stop. And they just they were able to space the floor. They did what Iowa does so well offensively. And it's really hard. It doesn't matter how good you are. If Iowa can space the floor and find openings and have good ball movement, good dribble drive penetration, it's hard to stop Iowa when they have good athletes. And they were able to do that for a while. Then they just started missing shots. And
offensive rebounds, man.
Yeah. And when you're playing against, it's Iowa State. It's a rivalry game, and it infuriates people to lose, and people overreact, as they always do.
That's a good team. That's a good Iowa State team.
But when you look at, they're number 3 in the country, you got to look at that first over the rivalry when it comes to this. You've got to be on every single possession, and they just weren't. In the last 5 minutes, Iowa State made a surge. They weren't tough enough mentally, physically, whatever, to make it happen themselves, to draw fouls, to get to the free throw line when the shots weren't falling. Just all the things you need to do to give yourself a chance to win and upset the number 3 team in the country in a rivalry game. So in the big picture, Rob, I think that they're fine. They're a good team. They're going to be competitive with just about everybody in the Big Ten. They probably impressed me more after that performance than they did going into it. I think they've got a lot of good pieces. And like I said, I think Harding and Thelwell starting them together, I think it's a really good move for them because it enhances their strengths.
Agree. And it gives you guys that can pressure the ball defensively, because I think Iowa is better defensively than it was a year ago by far, which the bar was pretty low. But like you said, I think Harding is really taking a step forward. We talked about development and getting better. Josh Dix, I think they need to go to him more. You could make an argument that he might be their most effective player now, just in terms of trying to stop him. He's a tough matchup because he does so many things well. I think Peyton is pressing. He came back to try to, build his resume, so to speak, for the NBA, and it feels like he's carrying that weight. But he's still capable of carrying a team. Freeman's playing well as well. The one thing I talked about earlier, Scott, when you go with Thelwell and Harding, Dix and Sanford, you're small. And you've got Freeman, and that hurts them on the boards, and that hurt him on the boards against Iowa State. But it's the trade-off. That backcourt, I think you have to continue to go that way. And Lajee does what he does, and I understood why he was in the starting lineup, because he gives you that defensive player, screener, rebounder. But he just doesn't give you enough on offense. So it's the trade-off now of trying to figure out which lineups are going to work best against which teams, because this team does have some quality depth. I mean, Price Sanford is a really good player coming off the bench.
Sure. And I don't think there's any problem with that. And as we know, the minutes get pretty much evenly dispersed, among the players. I would be surprised if Lajee Dembale's, regularly below 20 minutes a game. Maybe Thelwell's at 23. So it's not going to change that much. And Sanford gets in there, and a few of the other players, Traore is really good when he comes out, and so they've got good depth. They've got good players. And I think, as we know, starting is somewhat symbolic, but to some players it matters more. And I think when you look at Thelwell, he came to Iowa as a transfer with this opportunity, and he's been very effective, when he's played. I mean, he's a high energy guy, and you need that on a team like this because, as you said, Peyton Sanford is feeling the pressure. He's put it on himself, but he's also feeling it. And you have somebody who can kind of counteract that with his energy and lighten and have the kind of a bullish attitude on there. And I think that's great.
He and Lucy Olson are kind of similar in that way. They bring an energy and a fun, they're having you watch them, they are having a great time playing a game they love.
Yeah. And that flair, you just can't underestimate it. You need that from players. And so when you bring that in, right away, it's helpful. And he's happy because he's starting, and Dembale's younger. And, there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, first media timeout, you sub, or, maybe you sub out Dembale in for Thelwell, and then at the next one you sub out Harding for Thelwell, and then you just kind of move it around a little bit. That's fine. Beating New Orleans, that's just one of those games where you just you pay them, and then they go, and then that's it. I think I have that contract somewhere. It's right around like $100,000 that they paid them. So, it's kind of laughable when you think about it. But no, but going forward, Rob, there's also the other part of this, and this is the one that everybody's kind of latching on to, and rightly so. When you have a team that I look at as NCAA tournament caliber, good young people who play hard, who are good players. Um, why aren't people paying more attention to them? And some of it is getting the oxygen is getting sucked out by football. We know that. That's just the way the world works, and it will work. Women's basketball, sure, people are into women's basketball, but there is a space for men's basketball too. And you got to ask yourself, can Iowa continue with these types of the kind of apathy that's kind of running through the fan base about this, and how do you get it solved? I'm not sure you can, because even if this team goes on and wins some big important games, well, it's done that even every year practically. They won beaten ranked opponents. They've won big games, yet the fan base is pretty stagnant right now and kind of faltering. You said you were at the game Sunday, and that was about as bad as you've ever seen it.
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing that trend this year. It's just, and like we talked about before we started recording, I think it's alarming to a degree. But if it starts happening in conference games, especially high-profile conference games against, Wisconsin,
yeah,
or Minnesota or Illinois, schools that you have natural rivalries with, then it kind of raises the alert level from, maybe orange to red.
yeah, you're right. I mean, where I kind of look at that line is, how do you do once the students get back? Once the students are back on campus, that's where because when they're gone, people are mix and match. Some will come, some won't. And
They showed out for Iowa State.
yeah, they sure did. And that was, deserved. It was
Yeah.
a rivalry game. Number 3 opponent. They're going to come out for those, and they're not going to come out for New Orleans, because why? Why would you?
Well, it's Sunday at 1 o'clock during the NFL season.
Yeah,
It's one thing.
yeah, right.
The women were on at 11 on the road, so people were watching that probably on TV.
Yeah, and it's a game where you already know the outcome.
Yes.
What are you there for? I mean, the essence of sports is, yes, you want to beat teams decisively, but you want to beat teams that you think are fairly even to you or rivals decisively. These are games where you just don't screw up, just go have fun, and that's it. But I look at, in particular, the mid part of January. On Tuesday, the 21st, they play Minnesota at home at 8 o'clock. And then for that Friday, they play Penn State at home. Penn State's a good team.
Yep.
February 4th, they've got Purdue. February 8th, they've got Wisconsin. How do the fans respond then? That's going to be really critical, because is it going to be like Iowa State? If it is, well, you got to remember there was a lot of Cardinal in the audience. There was, I know some people got mad because they said about a third of the fans. Okay, maybe it was about a fourth of the fans, but it was noticeable.
You could hear "Let's Go State" pretty clearly.
Yes, absolutely. It was like seeing a Iowa football game in some stadiums. So if you're getting 10,000 to those games, that's not bad across the board, but it's bad for Iowa, because that means a third of the seats are empty. And how do you fill them? And you can do all you want with students. Hey, free pizza. Hey, you get a free t-shirt. Hey, you do that only goes so far. It's like, I don't really care. I mean, even free food.
I'm not sure the students are the issue here.
Yeah. And the rest of the public.
It's the general public, I think, that's checked out.
And there's really only one other answer, and that's a tough one when you've got a successful coach, who's the winningest coach in school history, who's led his team to a lot of postseasons, but there's not a connection there. It just isn't there. And what's the next step, Rob? And that's why Beth Getz is in the position she's in, so
we'll see. I don't think the story's going away. So it's certainly something we will monitor and follow as the season goes on. And, we'll be there, so we'll know what the crowds look like, because ticket sales aren't the same as asses in the seats.
Mm-hmm.
so we can monitor it then. We should probably move on to our Golden Gavel conversation. We won't spend a ton of time on this. The winner, very deserving, Nick Jackson. Again, circling back to the original conversation, this is the transfer portal working out very, very well for Iowa. Chad Leistikow from the Register has a nice story on Nick and his path to this point, and super guy. Really, and for those that don't know, the Golden Gavel is something the Iowa media gives out to one student athlete from the football program that what's the criteria, Scott? You have this memorized, don't you?
Yeah, but I can't remember anything, even my phone number half the time. Best exemplifies them in all their interactions with media and with the general public. So it's not just, hey, I'm a great guy in front of you and me and on Tuesdays and Saturdays, but also, you don't do anything stupid out in public either. So yeah, this is the fourth recipient. As we know, Kayvon Merriweather won it the first year, Spencer Petras the second, and then last year, Jay Higgins. And as I kind of mentioned about Jay previously, that he graduated.
You can only win it once. You can only have one Golden Gavel.
Yes, exactly. You don't need two. You don't need to be banging everybody with two gavels, like drumsticks.
But for us, we were faced with a different situation, a different process. It changed the process. Jamari Harris was in the running, one of the favorites to win the award, along with other guys. Logan Jones. I won't go through all the names, but they're as Scott said, really good guys in that locker room. So plenty of candidates, and it's like that every year. It's like, it could be, it's a tough decision. I voted for Jamari, but during the process, he was removed from consideration when, again, has some health concern. The university said, whatever the reason was, he was removed from consideration for this award. I disagreed with that. I know Scott's on the other side. As I said earlier in the podcast, we don't disagree on much. We're pretty like-minded on most things, sports and otherwise. But I get it, and this is kind of the landscape now. Guys are going to be making decisions like this. Was Jamari healthy enough where he could have played? Yeah, I think we'd all agree on that. Whatever he had, he probably could have played through, but he didn't. So I get that other members, my compadres in the media, felt like he should be removed from consideration. I get it. I didn't vote again after that when he was removed as a sign of protest. Not really. But that's kind of the situation. So, it even impacts stuff like this when you talk about the transfer portal, NIL, NFL futures, things like that. But that's kind of my thought on that. Share yours.
Yeah, this is difficult, and I certainly don't want to say anything negative about Jamari because he's been a fantastic person to get to know all these years. He has a great story, and it's a great story that hopefully he can share, and and enough general managers will take him, take that into consideration in the NFL Combine. To give out an award like this, you kind of need to be there for it. And that's probably where the line maybe was drawn, or, I'll say it, I drew it.
I think most people agreed with you, which is fine. I mean, we don't always agree on everything.
Yeah, right. And it's certainly no indication, again, of negativity really towards Jamari on this, because if he would have probably finished through the Nebraska game and then he would have opted out, then I don't, he would have, his votes were very, very high, and everything. But when, and I'll be honest, he was highly thought of. Nick was highly thought of, as Mason Richmond had a lot of attention. Logan Jones, right? Yeah. Logan Jones was, one vote shy of Nick Jackson. So there was, and then there were others who were nominated. I looked, and Aaron Graves got some consideration. Luke Lachey did. Cade McNamara had a couple of votes. So, it was really spread out and it wasn't cut and dried. It's just, yeah, we have, not everybody agrees on everything. We had difference of opinion on this one. It's unfortunate. I think, you know,
I don't have a problem with. I mean, Nick is so deserving of it. I mean,
yeah,
the guys you mentioned, I don't think any of us would have had a issue if any of those guys ended up with the most votes because they're all deserving. It's a good group of guys.
yeah. And maybe in the future, there's a couple things we can do to adjust this, and whether that's, hey, we're gonna start the voting at the end of the season as opposed to, because got in like last year, I'll just give, peek behind the curtain here. I would just kind of ask media, okay, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And last year it was J. No problem. He's the guy. But
Was this the closest it's been?
oh, it's by far the closest.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because the other three were pretty clear, right?
Yeah, Kayvon, if I recall, I'd have to look. I don't even think I have it right now, so it's kind of in the ether now. But I think Kayvon and then Spencer was number 2 that year, but Kayvon had won, decisively enough. And then the next year, Spencer was pretty universal, and Jay was unanimous. I think Spencer might have been almost unanimous as well, because no player have I been around has handled that kind of negativity and taken all the bullets that Spencer Petras did all those
The
years.
only one that was close was probably Vandenberg.
Yeah.
And that was before the award.
Right. And that was before the award. And you think about it, with Spencer's teams were better, so the scrutiny was heightened and more intense, and the dip. I mean, when you're the worst offense in the country, that's hard. It wasn't easy back then either in 12, but yeah, and then Jay, there's nobody like Jay. I mean,
and he may have won it this year if there were repeats allowed.
I know.
So
I just figured, I'm like, hey, he's going to be a first team All-American, and let's not have him have everything. Plus, the roommate probably is the one that.
So now they can cancel each other out with their gavels.
I know.
We're watching something else on TV.
Do they got like a bunch of, I can just see them sitting there in their recliners, and they've got like a bowl full of almonds or other nuts, and that's what they do. So no, overall, Rob, it is challenging, as we know, because we're going to have difference of opinion on this, and this is the kind of the new era that makes things more difficult.
Yep.
But I think we could both agree that it's a good thing that we do this. It's designed to honor the players who stand up, who talk to us, who handle themselves appropriately. And it's certainly not because they kiss our butts. That is zero to do with it. But then also handle themselves well in other speaking environments and things.
It's important to the fans too, because we're the conduit to, they tell us, we tell you what they tell us, and that's important. So, if they're being, open and candid and courteous and all those things, that's a reflection for the fans too, because they're speaking to the fans through us.
Yeah, exactly. And they see that through the videos.
Yeah.
And they read it through the stories, or, interpret it through the tweets or whatever. And always the only thing I worry about with videos, when somebody just posts like, hey, 7 minutes of raw video of somebody talking, is I'm always afraid, because sometimes you say something stupid or, and then for me, it's changed a little bit this way when I went from being at the Gazette, where you're running stuff every single day, to now where I might be working on something 2 weeks down the road, and I don't want this out tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you can put that away, so I've been a little more aggressive with that lately, and saying, when you're done, let me know so I can ask the question I want to ask, so I don't get in trouble. But I'll also say this, being around other teams, and certainly being around Iowa, there are very few teams that have a collection of character that we've experienced on this team for a long, long time. It's not just this year. And Nick Jackson is, I said, hey, he's our first transfer to win this. And He's going to be great. And I met his dad at the Nebraska game just briefly. I was coming off the field and I was coming up through the tunnel, and all the parents were lined up for senior day, and I saw him and his and Nick's mom. They're wearing 10 jerseys, and I just walked up. I said, "Hey, I just want to tell you guys, it's been a real pleasure getting to know Nick the last couple of years. He's a fantastic young man, and I swear his dad, he's like cloned from his dad. He looks exactly like him, and they're genuinely great people. So, I imagine that this is not going to change, that it's going to be challenging for us to pick these guys. And, if somebody wanted to pick up the mantle and do the same or do something similar for basketball, it would be probably, a good thing as well. But, I don't know. I don't really do the basketball thing anymore. And
Yeah,
I wouldn't be invited to give the gavel anyway. So.
yeah, and the opposite for me.
Yeah, right.
Oh, let's do our picks so we can get out of here. We've been going for I think we've been.
Yeah.
How long has this gone?
Past an hour and a half now. So
yeah, we like to talk.
Yeah.
This is our chance for Scott and I to catch up every week.
Yeah. Well, we last time we picked, it was the Big Ten championship. You won that. You picked Oregon. I think it was -3.5, and they won by 8 against Pennsylvania State, and I took Pennsylvania State, or Pennsylvania Commonwealth, as they should be called. But we've got 3 games this week, and they're all big, and I'm going to 2 of them, so I'm excited about that. And Friday night, the inaugural first ever FBS game, playoff game on campus, Indiana at Notre Dame, -7.5 for the Irish.
I am going to take the points here. I think Notre Dame wins this, but I think this is a close game, and that hook, I can see them winning by a touchdown. Notre Dame is more defensive oriented, so maybe a lower scoring game. Weather could be a factor. All those things play into it, but I'm going to take the Hoosiers +7.5.
As am I. I look at it as a 27-20, 27-23 kind of game. I would take Notre Dame straight up.
Yep.
But I'm going to take the Hoosiers to cover, unless they start throwing interceptions like crazy, which that's not been Curtis Work's MO. He should be the quarterback of your team next year. I would recommend strongly the New York Jets selecting him in the 2nd or 3rd round, and replacing who they have.
Anybody but the current guy.
Yeah. Exactly.
Bring Sam Darnold back.
That's the danger of this of the NFL too. Going all the way back to the portal stuff is players are not given enough time to develop at quarterback, especially.
Even in the pros.
We've seen it all the generations before that they were given time on the bench or they had a lot of mistakes. I mean, look at Peyton Manning and Troy Aikman's rookie years were disasters.
Look at Baker Mayfield now.
Yeah. Bake's a good guy, good player. And that's what's interesting, because there was 4 in that rookie class. Josh Allen, he's on a Hall of Fame trajectory right now. The kid from UCLA, Josh, I don't remember his name, whatever. He's terrible.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah. Very interesting guy.
Yeah, I went to Arizona, and then they went and got Kyler Murray, and then those 2, Baker and Mayfield and Sam Darnold, were not good, not poor. Well, Sam wasn't.
They were both considered busts.
Yeah, and Baker got pushed out of Cleveland. He went to a playoff game with them, and I thought that was really strange. Bounced around. Now he's with Tampa. I like him. I don't know, but anyway, how do I get there?
Seems to get along with Tristan pretty well. They both have young children now and can relate there. And obviously, he's protecting Baker. I would do everything I can for Tristan as well if I was the quarterback.
Exactly. And so that Sam Darnold, would they be able to, he's going to be a free agent. Maybe he's back in New York, but I would doubt that.
I'd be happy if they took Rourke, 2nd, 3rd round, and gave him a chance to develop.
He's a good player. So 2nd playoff game, SMU at Penn State, -8.5 for the Nittany Lions, and give me the Nittany Lions. SMU is going to go to a place where it's going to be about 24 degrees. I don't think they're going to be able to handle everything that Penn State presents, including the weather.
I'm with you. I would have rather this been Alabama at Penn State, but
Yeah.
SMU earned it, so they're the ones that are going to feel the wrath of State College.
You know what's weird is the winner of this gets Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl, and if you're Penn State, you got to go, wow, what a draw did we get? You know,
and then look at Oregon who beat them.
Yeah,
look at their draw.
Exactly. This is, if anything's going to change this dynamic, Rob, it's this.
Yeah,
because getting the 4 champions, they were expecting what they would have had last year.
Yes,
that. Okay, then you got Michigan and you got Alabama, you got Texas and you got Washington, and Florida State's undefeated and got left out. No, Boise and Arizona State should be in the. So I think when they go to 14 teams, they'll have 2 champions and they'll be basically SEC and Big Ten every year. So the third one, which I think is probably the signature one of the bunch, because I guess we could pick Clemson, Texas, but I don't think it's in that category either. Tennessee at Ohio State in primetime Saturday night, -7.5 for Ohio State. Rob, I see this 2 different ways. I could see Ohio State just blowing them out and playing like everybody expects Ohio State to play. Or I could see them farting around like they did against Michigan, and all of a sudden it's like, then the pressure just flattens them and then they lose a close game. I picked Ohio State to win the national championship before the season. They have the most talent of any team in the country. Quarterback is a concern for me. However, I'm going to take them, in 22 to 16 degree weather against Tennessee. And I hate the hook, but I'll pick them anyway.
Yeah, I've gone back and forth on this one for the reasons you stated, the potential outcomes here. If it's a blowout, it's going to be Ohio State, but I could also see them. Well, here's where I land, though. They're playing a name brand. They're playing an SEC school, one of the more successful SEC schools in the history of college football. So they'll be ready. And obviously, they want to get this taste of that Michigan game out of their mouth as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to go with you, and I'm going to take Ohio State rallying from the Michigan loss and also highly motivated beat an SEC team in the shoe.
I agree on this one because I think after losing to Michigan, if they would have beaten Michigan, well, they would have been in the Indy anyway. So who knows what had happened there, but
they may have had Penn State's draw.
Yeah, right. They would have taken that. If they were playing SMU and then Penn State was hosting Tennessee. Now that would have been good. That would have been one that is a coin flip to me. So I think Ohio State's still better than Penn State, but Penn State could end up going farther. Because as you said, the draw is the winner of this game plays Oregon in the Rose Bowl. Wow. Versus Penn State could be playing Boise. Texas Clemson winner plays Arizona State in the Peach Bowl. I mean, imagine if Clemson gets that upset. Yeah. They're playing basically a home game against Arizona State in Atlanta, and then Notre Dame, Indiana winner plays Georgia, which is, in the Sugar Bowl. I'm excited for this. I think it's going to be a great couple of games, four games and
three games with Big Ten teams is really good for the brand.
Yes. So I'm going to be, we'll see what Saturday night brings, but could we see Tony Battiti putting on some sunglasses and playing Disco Inferno and walking out on, and putting the Big Ten flag at the middle of the field
and then getting maced.
Yeah, right. That makes the commissioner of the Big Ten. Anything's possible with these guys.
All right, folks. I think we've taken enough of your time for today. Remember Iowa basketball Friday night, women against Northern Iowa. Those are sold out, but I'm sure we could probably gather some tickets. If you're up in the Northwest Iowa area, want to check out Iowa men's hoops against Utah. That's Saturday against Utah. And we'll be back next week. We're going to do Thursday next week, the day after Christmas. So everybody have a great holiday with their friends and family. And Scott and I will talk to you next week. Say goodbye, Scott.
Goodbye, Scott.